Endpoints News, and I'm pleased to be your moderator today. Today's webinar is sponsored by Medable, and our topic is Rapid Deployment of Remote Trials During Containment. I'm joined by Allison Holland, who is the head of Decentralized Remote Virtual Trials at Medable, and Qing Tian, the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Solutions. They're going to present for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to be turning the webcams on, and I'm going to take questions from the audience and ask both Allison and Qing. You can pose those questions to them both at any time during the webinar using the software. All right, let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce Allison Holland. Allison, take it away.
I'm based in the UK and very happy to talk today with my colleague Qing about our experiences around what's happening in decentralized trials, some examples of rapid deployments of what we can do today, but also to think forward as to what we can do go forward as we see that the COVID-19 pandemic is going to be with us for a little while, and our return to what we previously knew as normal might not be happening as quickly as we might have hoped a few weeks ago. So as we talk through today, we're going to talk about what options are currently available, what's been done to date, some of the lessons learned on what's been deployed to date and some of the challenges around that, and then how do we modify our plans and designs for how we might operationalize clinical trials in the future as a result of the pandemic. A little bit of background on Medable. Our CEO and co-founder is Dr. Michelle Longmire, who is a practicing dermatologist, and her frustration in the clinical environment was the lack of unified data at her fingertips to be able to adequately and effectively look after and assess her patients' care in the practical setting in a research trial. And Medable is really here to accelerate the clinical drug development process. That was always our mission and goal. However, the world has changed. It's not changing, it has changed. And what we've seen over the last 6-8 weeks is really going to have a fundamental impact on how we effectively design those clinical trials go forward and what options we build into the trials in order to be enabled them to continue in whatever is our new normal over time. So really to summarize, the regulators are really giving us that consistent guidance around, what's possible and what support we should expect. If we're wanting to modify our clinical trials and change the modality by which we're connecting with patients, that seems to be generally acceptable in most countries, and then looking at what we might want to do go forward really is going to require us to look at the evolving guidances coming from each of the regulators over time. But we're finding in our experience that the regulators and the ethics and IRB groups are very supportive of a rational change to continuity of a study that puts patient safety at the forefront driver of that change. So when we think about those in-flight studies, obviously they each had a nice planned schedule of assessments, and what we're having to do now is risk mitigate and look at what are the alternatives that may be appropriate, looking at what's the safety data that's required and how might we consider different modalities that we can support the patient's engagement with go forward and provide the clinicians and PIs with sufficient information about their patients that they can really effectively monitor the safety of their patients remotely. So replacing some of those traditional on-site visits, maybe with looking at replacing some home nurse supported visits, maybe using some televisits, looking at using different digital collections of patient-reported information, be that self-reported by the patient with ECOAs and EPROs and ECOAs for the clinic staff to guide the discussion with the patient, or indeed switching to some of the wearable devices to really collect that real life information about a patient and some of the either consumer grade or medical device grade wearables that are available around the world as well. So every protocol has to have a different approach. Every protocol is different, and therefore there really isn't one size that fits all. But this protocol assessment is a really key step to analysing the risk to patient safety and then the prioritisation of what activities need to be in place go forward. We've been aware of the need for decentralized trials for many years now. This isn't necessarily something new. In a traditional study where we were looking at patients traditionally being recruited from a window of area around a geographic site and then coming onto site for their visits, what we're seeing go forward prior to COVID-19 was the adoption of decentralized approaches, whereby a much more geographically dispersed and representative population of patients were able to be considered for a clinical trial and engaged in their home settings and connected to central hub sites. They might be local to them and they might be quite a distance away, depending on the setup of the study. And that the physician-patient relationship is still supported. However, the modality of that relationship, facilitating it in a digital way, could be changed. That would allow more patients to have access to that clinical trial than necessarily had access to it before. And that really puts the trial into a much more consumer-like experience. That means maybe patients who are working full-time, subjects who have young families and don't have the flexibility to be able to make regular trips to a hospital that could have been some distance away, have the options now to participate. And it's particularly important for maybe those frailer patients who the transit to and from an institution all the time was impactful to their health. So we're able to leave patients in their home setting and effectively design clinical trials to collect safe information from them in a regulated fashion. So obviously what we do today makes a difference to being able to support those rapid deployment studies now. We have a case study here of a rapid deployment that we undertook with a client and a CRO partner to really look at a critical study that was ongoing with patient visits coming up that had a really urgent need for the physician to have eyes on the patients. So we looked at our configuration on our platform and took a stripped back approach to say what was the minimum connectivity that was needed, and a consent and a televisit was the perfect initial response for that particular study to enable the activities to continue between the physician and the patient. So the patient was invited through the study, the patient's able to consent and download a consent application. And then we can look at the collection of televisit, the scheduling of the televisit timing and pass that through to the patients, and then able to support that the physician and the patient can have that clear televisit across the applications, whereby the patient's using their own phone and the platform applications are configured for that flexibility, that the patient on different phones, iOS or Android, can use that device that they're already familiar with, and the physician's able to schedule the call and collect the data safely from that patient to enable the ongoing support of that clinical trial. In this particular example, we were able to work from configuration start through to deployment and placing this into the clinical site's hands within a 10-day time frame. And actually this one was working in Italy as well, at the peak of the lockdown in Italy, at the peak of the pandemic patient crisis. So we actually found that the physician was also not always able to get to the hospital and was able to use this remotely to be able to connect to their patient remotely as well. And that the clarity and the connectivity of the system was of significant enough quality that they were very happy to continue and monitor their assessments of the patients through this modality. Obviously, to do this in fast timeframes like this, where we need to be extremely responsive to the ongoing needs of the trials versus the pandemic around us, means that there's a lot of risk mitigation assessment that's required to make sure that we're really not introducing a compliance risk or error into the protocol and into the data collection system for the study. So we really need to undertake that protocol risk assessment in order to know which protocols are suitable and where we can add value. Just throwing technology solutions at a study isn't necessarily going to solve the problem for us, but there are a lot of studies that are very amenable to being supported in a digital way. We're really obviously looking, as we said previously, about the patient safety risk, but also considering the availability of the IMP and the accessibility of that to the patient, and the safety of being able to continue dosing versus being able to monitor a patient post-dosing. Also looking at what the primary endpoints are of the study and can they be collected digitally? Is there a way in which we can collect sufficient information that allows us to know and assess the endpoints as they were designed in the study, or do we need to adjust for that? And really looking at the timelines and the length that the study is going to run over, and ensuring that we're enabling the care of the existing patients in the study, and possibly designing for new patient enrolment as we might see that happening in the future as well. But the priority being around, for today, the existing patients who are already in the study. And then we need to look at that deployment risk. What countries are we deploying into, and what other requirements might those countries have around the local sites? What are the timelines for being able to engage a patient? Is there a particular milestone coming up, like the patient's coming up to a critical endpoint visit, that we need to be able to try and connect in time for that? We need to look at the local country logistics. You know, what's happening on the ground? You know, are the transport services running? Can we even get devices where they might be needed to people? And devices, are the devices that people are using acceptable? Are there other local regulations and IRB recommendations? So do we need to notify? Do we need to make a full submission? Or do we need to work with any other local regulatory or approval groups, such as a privacy officer or other groups within the institutions or the country? We need to ensure that we're also looking at data privacy considerations, because in order to collect digitally, that normally means that we need to collect some more personal information about the patients that's identifiable. So maybe their email address and so on. So making sure that we've got the appropriate privacy policies and appropriate consenting language, that everyone in the ecosystem understands what's going to happen with that data, who's going to be able to see it, the patient has the choice to consent to that, and that we're able to show that that data is going to be held to the highest data privacy rigor that is required around the globe. We also need to understand site staff availability. Who's going to be using the digital technology? Who's going to be connecting? Where are they going to be? And what's their connectivity like at that location? So is the Wi-Fi good enough at the institution? Is the other site staff actually going to be on site or remote as well? And making sure that we know exactly where people are going to be and what needs to be in people's hands at various time points, and what kind of equipment might need to be shipped to people as well. In the instance in Italy, we were shipping in a tablet that was a cellular enabled tablet. So not only did we have a very short deployment time to design the system, but we also had to be able to manage those import and transportation of devices requirements as well within that very short time frame. And obviously, when we're working like this with our partners, sponsors or CROs, it's important that we don't bypass some of the requirements that we have for contracting, quality assessments, and making sure that we are all operating within a quality environment that can be supportive for any submissions later down the line, that we haven't introduced any risk there. So really making sure that we have everyone lined up that might be needed to fast track some of these activities. It might be that we need to do a due diligence assessment remotely with with companies that haven't worked together before, and therefore making sure that we've got everybody lined up who understands the goals, the timeframes, and are willing to work towards that to meet that collective goal of supporting our patients out in the field is key. And then looking at mitigation planning, because of course, no matter what we plan for, there are always going to be other things that crop up along the way as well. So really making sure that we're pragmatic in our scoping, that we understand exactly what the priorities are that we're trying to put into people's hands, and that we are able to really think about the responsibilities, the roles, and the project plan that's needed, and the handoffs and the communication that's going to be required to really change a protocol mid-flight and be able to adapt in these really tight timeframes. It's important that we do it for the safety of our patients, but it does mean that we need everybody to work in a slightly accelerated way in order to accommodate this. And that we don't forget that this is a lot of change management, and that we need to support people with extra communication, training, deploying a solution set, just as a technology doesn't work if people don't understand how to use it, and that they've got the right backup and know who to call and where the support mechanisms are. So this isn't something that should be undertaken lightly, but it is entirely feasible and possible to do with the right planning and the right steps in place to be able to achieve success. So as we think about our future trials go forward, one of the goals that we have is that we want to make sure we're not shifting the burden of administration, of managing multiple different point systems to our patients and our sites, but that we're really thinking about how do we connect all of the data together and have a very streamlined, almost concierge service for patients and sites and study teams, such that we're able to really seamlessly integrate data from multiple sources and provide it in real time to the people who need to see it in a way that allows them to make real-time useful decisions around their patient safety and ongoing care. So at this point, I'm going to introduce you to Ching to really talk through, why all these different component parts are important, and then how we might build a ecosystem of different parties to bring this together, so that as we talk about that one size not fitting all, that we've got lots of flexibility around the different suites of solutions that might be applied to different individual clinical trials.
Okay, so COVID-19 presented an unprecedented challenge to us, but it will not stop us from developing new therapies. You may have studies that were about to start but are now on hold, or you may be planning for studies to start in 6 to 9 months. The choice now is if you should continue with the traditional model, or it's time to adopt and transition to a digitally enabled approach. With the reality that COVID-19 will not go away anytime soon, incorporating decentralization into the plan for a digitally enabled solution makes a lot of sense. In this section, I will first go through the commonly used tools in the decentralized trial setting, and then share some thoughts on approaching the implementation that is scalable, based on my learnings over the past 2.5 years working on decentralization efforts at Big Pharma and at Medable. To operationalize a decentralized trial, whether it's hybrid or fully virtual model that you're thinking, you will probably need some enabling solutions, as I call them, tools in the decentralized trial toolbox. This toolbox includes a number of digital solutions. For example, eCOA to capture clinical outcome assessments from a PI or a central reader, ePro for patient-reported outcome and diaries. Both are widely used in studies today. eConsent is a tool to facilitate remote patient-informed consent process that is GCP compliant. And online patient recruitment utilizes social media campaigns and online pre-screening approaches to increase trial awareness and interests from patients to improve study recruitment. eSource makes source data accessible from anywhere to enable remote monitoring and also to support some of the at-home patient support activities. The adoption of eConsent, eSource, and online patient recruitment has gained momentum over the past couple of years, but they are still not standard part of many studies. Now comes to telemedicine, connected devices, wearable technology that can capture data directly from patients or pulling data from EMR. Those are the latest additions. Without doubt, this toolbox will continue to expand and improve over time. But technology alone can't support all the needs. Your study may have blood sample collections. Study drugs may be administered through sub-Q injection or infusion. They can be done digitally today and need to be performed in person by a trained health professional. By deploying home nurse support, more assessments can be conducted at a patient's home. Direct-to-patient study drug shipment utilizing community-based lab service centers and image facilities are also attractive options and are being developed and added into the toolkit. The goal is to expand the capability of the decentralized model and with the flexibilities to fit individual studies needs, as Ali said earlier. So it's a variety of options, and having all of them into your studies consideration will give you a lot of varieties and the flexibilities that will be very much needed. Although not all of those tools are new to the industry, the majority of the experience so far has been in an individual deployment setting. For example, rare disease studies have been using home study nurse support for a number of years. eCOA, ePro have also been deployed in many neuroscience and vaccine studies. But embedding several solutions to a study to decentralize is still pretty unfamiliar to the industry, especially with interventional trials. Next slide, please. So how do we turn the decentralized trial concept into a repeatable operation? Perhaps we can take a three-pronged approach. First is to identify the right solutions for your company's needs. As I said earlier, there are two types of solutions, technology and service solutions. On the technology front, it's so great to see the huge interests from tech companies in marketing solutions to the pharma industry. There are more choices than ever before. To find the right solution for your needs, I suggest asking some questions. The first question is whether the tech company have experience in supporting clinical trials. For companies that are new to the industry, there's a steep learning curve of all the regulations, such as GCP, 21 CFR Part 11, and HIPAA and GDPR requirements. And should you choose a platform or a best of breed approach? With the best of breed approach, you have the freedom to select the most established solution in each capability. They may be from several different vendors and with completely different user interfaces. You may also need to invest in system integration at some point. With the platform approach, you will look for companies that already have 2 or more decentralized capabilities in their platform with a unified interface and integrated view of data. At Medable, we have decided to take the platform approach, and that's built into our solution with the belief that it greatly simplifies the complexity for all the stakeholders, especially for patients and sites. Imagine what patients' experience would look like if they need to use 5 different apps to participate in a study instead of just 1 or 2. Even worse, if they have to carry multiple smartphones when some of the apps only work on a specific provisioned device. We all also know sites are inundated with different systems from different sponsors they need to work with. While we can't quite solve this challenge yet, we should definitely try to minimize the number of additional systems we add to them as part of a decentralized trial study conduct. Can we aim for 1 app, 1 device approach? If you do want to take the platform approach, find out if the platform has the flexibility you need. Can the platform be configured with only the selected components specific to each study's needs, or do you always have to go through the same workflows regardless of the study? Are your studies global? Even if the first trial that you're thinking about piloting this model will be a US-only study, given the amount of effort it takes to evaluate onboard technology, you get much better return by taking a longer term and pipeline view and go with a solution that can be scaled to meet your needs. To deploy the technology in the local language is definitely a must-have for decentralized trials. In addition, find out if the company can provide global contact center support to sites and patients when they encounter issues. Does the technology support BYOD or provisioned devices only? And what type of BYOD device does it support? Is the company able to provide device provisioning services when needed and in countries where your study will be conducted? On the service front, the most often needed decentralized trial support is home nurse service. Again, having a global provider can give you the coverage and flexibility that you may need. Experienced home nursing companies are also a great resource for local regulations on what procedures can be performed at home. Direct-to-patient study drug shipment as an emerging service has seen a huge demand in the current environment. You can look for a vendor on your own or ask your home nursing vendors if they have established relationship as a starting point. Many of them do have those relationships. With all the solutions that I just talked about, there's a lot of vendor qualification and audit work. The process can easily take 6 months or longer in many companies. Get started early so qualification won't hold up your study. now you have assembled the toolkit and are waiting for procurement and QA to qualify them. Let's turn our attention to the studies. As decentralization is still new to most project teams, we highly recommend early engagement with key stakeholders, both internal and external. In addition to the regulatory agencies, IRBs, ethics committees, engaging and collaborating with your solution providers to leverage their experience in various at-home support options can result in a more optimal design. Generally, like Ali said, the drug safety profile is top of the consideration, and that's usually the deciding factor whether study drug administration should stay on site or can be moved to a patient's home. Another important consideration is data comparability, whether the endpoint data collected at home or local setting is comparable to those collected on site. And also, please keep in mind that decentralization doesn't have to be all or none. So that means some sites can use decentralized trial approach, but other sites may not. And also, it can vary from country to another. Again, when you're factoring that consideration, make sure the data is comparable, especially for your endpoint data. You may also want to engage with patients and sites to get their inputs at the planning stage. There's a number of patient advocacy groups that you can reach out to. Medable also has an independent patient advisory council to provide patient perspective to our solutions as needed. And we're in the process of forming a site advisory council. If you have a study with complex decentralized design or with multiple wearables that are new to your company, it would really be worth considering a dry run to find out how everything works out before deploying at large scale. After the design is confirmed, developing a detailed operational project plan with clear roles and responsibilities, technology trainings that are needed, process trainings that are needed, mapping out how the data flows from system to system, row to rows, and where data is stored, and procedures that will be followed. For most studies, there will be more technology, more vendors, and more roles involved with something new to everyone. The operational plan serves as the study menu to keep everyone on the same page and be able to work cohesively together to execute the study. Now your study has started. A real-time dashboard is even more important than in the traditional study setting. Sites need to know if a patient is following the protocol with at-home or local activities, whether the study drug has been delivered to the patient or the home nurse visit occurred as scheduled. Patient needs to feel comfortable that the PI is monitoring his or her safety and disease progress, and that the communication channel is open. Sponsor CRO needs to monitor the study progress and integrity, review and clean data that are captured. When issues arise, communication plan and risk mitigation plan can be relied upon to guide the team in making assessments and decisions. And lastly, a rapid feedback loop can ensure learnings are incorporated right back to the study to improve the experience of patients and sites.